is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogman, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on SUBSTACK. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. So, how's everybody doing? Good? Everything is good here. We're now heading into fall, which is good. Cooler weather. It's incredible. Who was I talking to the other day? I was saying, wait a minute. Weren't we just getting into 2025 the other day? Like, what happened? Wait, 9 months have gone by? And of course, I'm sure everybody, you're seeing it all over the place. Everywhere you go to shop, you see everything is about the fall. Something, either whether it's Halloween or Thanksgiving. And I'm waiting for them to put up the Christmas decorations. But yeah, and of course, I say, how all the summer stuff is on sale. All the barbecue stuff is on sale. So yeah, but here we go. That's just the way it is. And I hear people talk about it, and I recognize it. That once upon a time, when you were a kid, you would say a year, and a year seemed like forever. Like, a year? You mean that? No, that's like equivalent to us for a century. And now it's like, wait a minute. And sometimes I'll look at, how your phone, I store some of my photographs, they end up, and every once in a while, it'll show up some of my old photographs, and I'll go, wait a minute. And then it'll be like, this was a year ago, and I was like, wait a minute, that was 2 years ago? Yeah, that kind of deal. So, I don't know what to tell you, except that it's crazy when you, how can I say it? You really, what's this? You know how they say, when time flies, it's like sometimes I feel like, hey, even when you're having fun, like even when you're not, it's like, what happened? Like, this just like whipped by me. Like, where did it go? Now, let me see. Hold on a minute. Let me see if I can because I wanted to show you guys. Here we go. Let me see if I can find this one. And this is because I found this really interesting little news story. Okay, because there's always weird stuff going on, thankfully. And like I said, I was trying really hard not to find anything having to do with UFOs, because like I said the last time, God, everything was like UFO this, UFO that. Blah, blah. So this last one that I came across, it's out of a local news station, all right? And basically what it's saying is, it's out of a WPRI, all right? And it's Trick or Treat, the Conjuring House, listed for auction on Halloween. And the reason why I picked this is that everybody knows Dan Rivera, who was touring with one of the Raggedy Ann doll that was with the Warrens Museum, that was that what the Conjuring movie was based on. Even though they had to change it, they couldn't use the Raggedy Ann facade. They had to make their own scary doll. He passed away suddenly while he was touring with the doll, and I believe they recently sold the Warrens Museum, and they're even going to take the doll, I think it is, to Maine. But so this keeps on going. By the way, I think they're going to come out with a new Conjuring movie. But anyway, basically it's saying the Rhode Island farmhouse made famous by the supernatural blockbuster The Conjuring has been listed for auction on none other than Halloween. The antique homestead is a rural town of Burrowville, has been listed on the auctioneer website, J. Manning Auctioneers, under a mortgagee's foreclosure auction. Oh, wow. Which is typically a public sale where a lender sells a property because a borrower has defaulted on their mortgage payments. This antique farmhouse that has become famous for historical paranormal sightings and activity, blah, blah, blah. The auction, which was confirmed by town officials on Friday, scheduled on the website for October 31st, which is also Halloween. The date is fitting for the home that's been a draw for paranormal enthusiasts from around the world. And you know what? I take that back, because I was thinking, the owner or whoever, whether it was, that they specifically chose that date. But no, if it's up for auction, it says here, the auction, which was confirmed by town officials on Friday, is scheduled, blah, blah, blah. The property, which includes 8.5 acres of land, was last sold in 2022 to Bale Fire LLC for $1.5 million, according to land records. Okay, the company is controlled by Jacqueline Nunez, a self-described medium who has faced a litany of issues in the town over the past year. I wonder what those issues were. After purchasing the property, Nunez transformed it into a tourist attraction where people could come visit the property, explore for spirits, and even stay overnight for a price. But problems started bubbling up last August when this same news agency fired her employee after she said the spirit of the farmhouse's 19th century owner, John Arnold, told her the manager had been stealing. Oh boy. The firing spurred a legal fight over back pay and resulted in another former workers coming forward, alleging they also had faced issues working for Nunez. Burville officials then revoked Nunez's entertainment license last November, saying there were issues with the property along with her application with the town and her interactions with local police. Here we go. Nunez, however, refused to cancel trips to the property that had already been scheduled, which ultimately left many visitors in a lurch and scrambling to recoup funds after spending hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars to visit the property. That's not good. She also had personal disputes with other people from the paranormal community, including Ghost Hunters TV star Jason Hawes, who ended up filing a police report alleging Nunez was harassing him and his family. I got to look that up later on. Inquiring minds want to know. Nunez could not be immediately reached for comment on Friday evening, blah, blah, blah. The latest development that the home is heading for auction hour will likely come as welcome news to comedian Matt Rife and YouTuber Elton Cassidy. They're the ones that bought the museum. The two friends who recently purchased the Connecticut home of famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren have been pushing to buy the Conjuring house. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. So see, and that's why, again, I'm not paying you because the spirit is telling me you're stealing. I got to look into the other thing. I'm just, I'm a paranormal gossip. What can I say? It's one of those things. It happens. But anyway, let's go ahead and get to the good part. The good part is, who is the guest today at Stories of the Supernatural? He's been here before, and his name is David Brody. He's a 12-time Amazon #1 best-selling fiction writer with over 500,000 books sold. His children call him a rock nerd because of the time he spent studying ancient stone structure, which he believes evidence of exploration of America prior to Columbus. He has served as a director of NERA, which is New England Antiquities Research Association, has appeared as a guest expert on documentaries airing on History Channel, Travel Channel, PBS, and Discovery Channel. A graduate of Tufts University and Georgetown Law School, he was raised in Laconia. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Dave?
Doing great, Marlene. It's nice to be back with you.
Yes, it's my pleasure. So yeah, I had to throw in that little bit of paranormal gossip at the
Well, that's Rhode Island. That's my backyard. I'm in Massachusetts, so
okay.
You mentioned that, yeah. So I'm marked it on my calendar. I might go down and make a bid.
I'm telling you, and you know what? I know that there's been other paranormal groups that have purchased these supposedly haunted houses, and they do that. They rent it out, like if you have a paranormal group that wants to come and, let's say, stay overnight. And I know a lot of them, but I think she got off on the wrong foot with maybe somebody in the town. And
well, it sounds like she's a piece of work. I mean, all I know is what you said in your story. So it's funny because I live sort of close to Salem, Massachusetts, which obviously for the month before Halloween is incredibly inundated with tourists because of all the all the association with witches and stuff.
Yes.
But Yeah, it's a big business. It's becoming. You
Yes.
said people rent those places out, but I know Salem for the month of October. You can't get near Salem. It's so
No, it's
crowded.
very, people don't realize Salem, but there's various properties. I mean, I'm not even, there's the like the Rolling Hills, and there's the other sanitarium, the one in Kentucky, which those get a lot of people there, but then
Hmm.
you have these smaller properties or homes that are like a paranormal. You could, paranormal groups will say, "Hey, we're paying to stay overnight there," and basically it's to get proof of whatever. But yes,
Yeah, I mean,
that's yes,
it's a fun business idea,
yes,
and I could see where people would be drawn to it because it's a fun thing to do for get your friends together for a night and go, go have an adventure. So yeah,
right,
by all
right,
means.
and this is the thing, the original story, of The Conjuring, the where the movie, your first movie was based on. I believe one of the daughters, she's Andrea Perron. She's talked about her experiences growing up there. All right, when her family moved in there, so that's what people are like. Oh my God, for sure this place is haunted. So they're gonna, this is not like something that happened really that long ago, per
Well, like
se.
I said, I may take a drive down to Rhode Island
Oh,
on Halloween and,
yeah.
and check out the auction. So, and actually, you said it was Jerome Manning. I think I know Jerry Manning, the auctioneer. I used
Okay,
to do
yeah,
business
he's the
with him a
one
little bit
that's
in real estate when I was a real estate lawyer. So I
there. You
actually know
go.
him. I could make a call and say, give me
You
the inside scoop on that.
Hey, you got the hook up there. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Well, and this is the thing that I was surprised, because I was thinking, oh, somebody, whoever bought, because I knew that had sold. I said, oh, somebody's gonna cash in. That now another Conjuring movie's coming up, and all these things about the Conjuring, about the paranormal investigator that died, and the doll. It's all hit the news, so now they're putting it on the market to make big bucks. And no, it went into foreclosure. So there you go.
Yeah. So, sounds like it was a bank. Yeah.
So yeah, the but I'm telling you, I've heard a lot of excuses not to pay your employees, but the spirit in the house told you that it's like, oh, that's not a good sign. That's not a good
That's
sign.
it's a good story though.
No, it's a great story. It's a great story. Let's
Yeah.
see what happens. That'd be fantastic. You become the new owner of the Conjuring house. That'd be
Probably not
great.
going to happen. Probably not. I might go just to watch him. Not. I'm probably not going to be putting him. I can just. That'll be a fun one to explain to my wife when I come home. Guess what I did today, honey? Guess what I bought?
you're never gonna you're
You're
never
never
gonna
going to
believe
guess
me if
what
I told you.
I.
But yeah, it's I imagine I've interviewed a couple of times Kristen Lee. She owns, I think she still owns it, the Bel Air house in Ohio.
Mm.
Um and let me tell you something. She has a whole backstory to it, but it's a full-time job. Let me tell you, managing one of these places. Once you have a steady stream of people coming to stay there, it's work. You need a
Yeah. No. Yeah. I'm not surprised by that, and I bet somebody buys this one in Rhode Island and makes a go of it. It sounds like, not to get too deep into that, but it sounds like the business was going okay, just that people were stealing and arguing with each other and getting in trouble with the town, and it doesn't sound like the underlying business wasn't working. It just sounds like the personalities weren't working.
Yeah, the personalities, and that kind of what they call paranormal drama kind of deal.
There we go. There
That's
we
what
go.
it is. So let me ask you. I know you've done a lot of work with from the last time. I think you've put out two other books from the last time that we spoke, right? What was your most
I
recent book?
So I've been doing two a year, so I think I've
Okay,
probably done four since we spoke last,
okay,
which I think was a couple
okay,
weeks ago. So my last book is something called Templar Lies,
okay.
um, and that sort of gets into the whole artificial intelligence thing. The whole basically what happens is when we talk about the Templars, you always end up talking about the lost Templar treasure. What
Yes.
is it and
Mm-hmm.
where is it? Okay, and
Mm-hmm.
so at some point artificial intelligence is going to become smarter than us. It's probably already there already, but in my book, a treasure hunter, the villain, comes up with this idea that if he can gather all the information that's out there about the Templars and their treasure and feed it into an AI model and
Okay.
ask the model, where is the Templar treasure buried? Could it figure it out? And I won't give the story away, but the idea is that if you have enough information, and it can't just be the information that is online already, because in that case, the model probably could figure it out. But there's a lot of information that is held privately by researchers that hasn't hit the internet. And if it hasn't hit the internet, then it can't be learned by the AI model. So the job for this character in my book was to not only gather all the information on the internet, which is easy to do, but also gather the information from researchers who are privately exchanging it, notes and emails and lectures. And
you don't talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you can get that information and load that into the model, now the model has all the data, all the information, and presumably, if the model is smart enough, it can figure out where the treasure is. So that's what it kicks off the whole story. And but it was fun for me.
That's a great premise. That's excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun to. It was actually fun because one of the things I did was I said to the model, okay. You're probably familiar with the name Scott Walter. He used to host the America Unearthed TV show on History Channel.
Yes.
Okay. So I said, exactly. And Scott knows a lot about the Templars and a lot about the Templar treasure, and he's one of the leading researchers. So I said to the model, hypothetically, where would Scott Walter say the Templar treasure is buried? And so that was sort of a fun thing to do, and it gave the three leading candidates what Scott would think. And then I said, well, what would David Brody say? Thinking that the model would not really know who I am because I'm not a TV personality.
Right.
I've written books, but but the model, for some reason, these models are really up to date. It knew exactly who I was. It knew all my books, and it gave me back maybe a 3-page answer.
Wow.
And it was eerie because it the way it spoke it sounded like my voice, the same tone and the same incantations and the same vocabulary and the same way. And it was like talking to myself. My poor wife said, "Oh my gosh, it's bad enough to have one of you. Now we have a second one of you too." But this AI model basically was speaking to me like it was me, like I'm looking in the mirror, and it gave the exact answer I would have given. And it was sort of eerie that the AI has come so far just in the past, I don't know, 2 years.
Yes.
Because 2 years ago we didn't even know about it. Now it's like so advanced that it eerie is the word. It just it freaked me out. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going so fast, and it's going so quickly. In a couple of years, it's going to take everything over. But it was a fun story. It was fun to sort of. It was, in some ways, it was like the greatest hits
I've written.
20.
That's a very plausible idea as to you see research of other type going into that direction.
Yeah, because the model's able to collect incredible amounts of data and analyze the data, and it's all based on probabilities, and just sort of figure out, well, historically when treasures are found, they are found, along the coastline, or they're found in a historical spot, whatever it is. It's able to analyze all that almost instantly, and it basically based on probabilities. Okay, then I think the Templar treasure is in Minnesota near the Kensington Runestone, or at Oak Island in Nova Scotia, or in this Catskill Mountains where Zena Halpern did her research, or whatever it is.
Oak Island, I've lost touch. Are they still on? By the way, I'm out of curiosity.
They are still on. They have a new season. I think it starts next week already, but they're still on. They've got another season. At this point, the treasure is not the treasure. The treasure is the advertising revenue they generate from that TV show, because it's History Channel's. It's their most popular show. It's been their most popular show for I think a dozen years, the highest rated show.
No, I know that.
They rake it in, and look, I'm just like everybody else. I don't miss an episode, partly because it's involved in my research, so I really can't miss an episode. But I don't want to miss an episode because I feel like they're so close, and personally, I don't think the treasure is still there. I think there was at one point a treasure there, and it's been retrieved and moved. But there's still evidence of the old treasure having been there, which to me is interesting. And that evidence might tell us what it was and where it ended up. But I don't think we're ever going to see a situation where they say, Eureka, here's our chest of treasure. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think they might have a Eureka moment where they say, we've now figured out what it was and where it ended up, which would be fun too. But
I don't know, how big is Oak Island? How large is it? How many acres?
Oh, the island. Yeah. The island itself is, I think. Let's see. It's divided into, I think, 30 odd lots. And I think they're quarter acre each. So it's not.
It's not big.
If it's 8 acres, roughly. I might have those numbers wrong, but it's 8, 10, 20 acres at the most. It's not a huge island.
But right, that's my point. It's like, wait a minute. I mean, how many places can you go with this? You're on an island with finite. What happened? So yeah, no, there was a while back before I used to watch it all the time because it was like, they would have these cliffhanger moments. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh,
With
they're very
Mother
good at
Epps.
that. Yes,
And then it was like,
they're very good at
oh,
that. Yeah.
you guys, you're gonna find
Let's
anything,
see.
But yeah.
I'm sorry. Oak Island's it's 140 acres. I'm
Oh
wrong.
really?
It's
Okay, that's
140
pretty
acres.
big.
Yeah.
That's pretty big.
So
That's not bad.
it's about a mile long and a half mile wide. So
Yeah,
it's
but
actually
still,
a decent size.
that's
Yeah.
more. That's a little bit bigger. But still, even then, let me ask you one thing. The other day, I said, you know what? I want to ask Dave. The other day, I was doing some research, and they were talking about something called the Black Madonnas or the Black Madonna, and they were saying how
I
that they
wrote
believe
about that today. I wrote about it today. Go
Are you
ahead, ask your question. Go
serious?
ahead. I'm
Wow.
writing a new novel. I wrote about it today. Yeah.
That the supposedly they believe that they came into Europe with the Templars, like after the Crusades, like prior around the 13th century. That's basically the ones that brought it into Europe, specifically into France. Is that
Yeah. Oh,
correct?
that's so funny. So my wife and I are going to the southern France in 3 weeks to look at the
Okay.
Black Madonnas. So it's so
Mm-hmm.
funny you should bring this up. So yeah, one of the theories. No one can quite figure it out. It's funny because if you ask the church, you know, elders
Yes.
why these Black Madonnas are in the churches, they say, oh, they used to be white, and when we burned all those candles, the
Right.
smoke turned
The
to
wood
black.
turned it dark. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even though all the other statues in the church are still white, only
Right.
the Madonnas are. So one of the theories is that um, the Madonna, the Black Madonna is it's a morphing together of
Mm-hmm.
two famous women in history, Mary Magdalene, and she's a very very popular in southern
Right.
France. The whole
Yes. Yes.
Jesus bloodline thing, and
Yes.
one of the legends is that she left after the crucifixion and ended up in southern
Right. They
France
even
in the
have like a
Languedoc.
reliquary and like a skull and a bunch of stuff there.
Yes,
It's
yeah.
a
That
big
one of
deal.
her supposed her grave site. So whether we're in Rennes-le-Château or the
Yes.
Languedoc region or
Mm-hmm.
Provence, southern France,
Yes.
are near the border with Spain. Border with Spain. Yes. So that's one possibility. And then morphing together Mary Magdalene with the Queen of Sheba, made famous when she went up to visit King Solomon, and they became
Yes.
lovers. And this is, and it's unclear exactly how the Sheba thing gets involved, but it's a morphing together of Mary Magdalene and the Queen of Sheba to get these Black Madonnas. This because Sheba obviously was black, being from Ethiopia, and it's unclear exactly where it all comes from. And of course, like I said, the church just sort of whistles past the graveyard and says, "Oh, it's just candle smoke. There's nothing to see here." But
Right.
Montserrat, which is a famous place famous monastery in near Barcelona, has a Black Madonna, but mostly it's southern France, like you said. And again, as you said, it corresponds to the time of the Templars in
Right.
the 12th and 13th century. So there's something going on there. It may be involved. It may be related to the Cathars. The Cathars were
Yes,
a group of
that it was part that Gnosticism and the Cathars and
exactly. They lived in southern France, and eventually they were wiped out in
yeah.
really the first ever religious genocide.
Yes.
The Vatican sent troops down and wiped out these fellow
Yes.
Christians in southern France because they were worshiping an unorthodox version of Christianity. Their version of Christianity was different. It was Gnostic, like you said. They apparently were worshiping these Black Madonnas. They believed strongly in Mary Magdalene being the wife of Jesus. The big thing that they believed in, they believed that they did not need to have a priest intercede for them
Right.
in their
That
conversation
was
with
like a big
God.
no-no back then. I was like, what?
Yeah, that
You
you
heretic?
can't we can't you can't be cutting us out of the equation.
No.
We need the collection plate. And so they basically went down. It's called the Albigensian Crusade. It was the early 1200s,
Mm-hmm.
and they wiped out hundreds of thousands of Christians. They basically
Yes.
just murdered them because
Yes.
they were not beholden to the Vatican, even though they were very pious and they were very religious and they were good people. They weren't doing anything wrong, just minding their own business.
Yeah.
But that's involved with the Black Madonnas as well. So a lot of the history that we would have had involving the Black Madonnas was wiped out when the Cathars were wiped out in the 13th century.
Well, I was also looking at that they were saying that one of the theories is that the Black Madonna is also tied into goddess worship from earlier. In other words,
Sure.
that they kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like we'll substitute this, but really what we're as goddess worship. maybe going back as far as whether it's Sybil or Cybele, however, or even ISIS. That that's one of the
Sure,
theories,
exactly.
and they just
Yeah.
gave her that facade.
You go way back to the time of when Abraham and Sarah, when when the concept of a monotheistic male God first evolved with Abraham. There's a fascinating book called The Red Tent by Anita Diamant. I don't know if you've read that book.
I read that a few years ago, but yes, I read that.
It's a great book, and Sarah, Abraham's wife, the women go to the Red Tent once a month for their menstrual cycle, and they have these little goddess figurines that they worship, fertility goddesses, which are very similar to the Black Madonna, like you said, that these were fertility goddesses. This is the sacred feminine, and that the Madonnas may be, as you just said, a residual of that ancient belief in the sacred feminine and the goddess that was stamped out by the patriarchal religions, Judeo-Christianity. We can't be having any. We got one God, Yahweh. He's got a beard. He's not a woman. None of that stuff, which is silly. But that's what's happened. But this may be sort of a silent protest to that, or a little bit of an echo of those ancient female practices of worshiping the goddess, especially during the menstrual cycle.
And of course, if I remember correctly, this was a woman during her menstrual cycle was impure, so that's why she was sent to the Red Tent.
Yes,
and no men would go in there. In other words, what happened in the Red Tent stayed in the Red Tent, kind of deal.
Yes, and the women, I think, were happy to go. They're like, we get away from the guys. We get
to take a break.
Take a break from these guys. And they weren't allowed in the temple because they were considered unclean.
Yes.
Men were not allowed to lay with them because it was unclean. It was a big thing. But while they were in that Red Tent, because no men would come in, they could freely practice some of those ancient pagan religious rituals with the goddess figurines.
Right, and that's that they and they were. As a matter of fact, I was also researching that I believe there's, because like a darker aspect also to the Black Madonnas is that they were saying that usually the Madonna traditionally as the Virgin Mary or the Mother of Christ, you see it as depicting motherhood or tender motherhood, but that they kind of took it over, even though it's a Madonna, of a darker aspect, which might even include human sacrifice or some type of sacrifice because of the ancient pre-Christian Judeo-Christian belief system. Okay,
interesting.
That and that at some point that once, let's say, the after Christians took over the Vatican and everything, that they had some tunnels. They outlawed human sacrifice. This is like when there's different religions, of course, and Rome is already going down the tubes, that after a while they were practicing this type of worship in some tunnels that were underneath the Vatican, I believe they were rediscovered in the 1930s, and they found a lot of the different types of artifacts down there, because they have been used extensively as burial sites, including, I believe, they even found what they thought was remnants of Peter. That was
I never heard the tie-in to the Black Madonnas with human sacrifice, but
in the sense of that, basically the Black Madonna is a stand-in. How's that? For an older goddess cult that did that.
Yes.
And that they
that could be
basically, so maybe we didn't get burned at the stake.
I can speak to, you had mentioned one thing about the Templars brought the Black Madonnas to Europe, and I can, there's an interesting backstory to that, and the patron of the Templars is a guy named Bernard de Clairvaux.
Yes.
This is in the mid to late 1100s. He's the guy who sort of wrote their charter, and he's later became Saint Bernard, but he was their patron. He was their champion. He himself was a big proponent of the Virgin Mary. Mm-hmm. At that time, the church was very patriarchal. It was all about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. There was no feminine at all. Mm-hmm. And he started preaching about having this dream where he was blind, and whether that was literally blind or just sort of figuratively blind, It's unclear, maybe both. And that the way he was cured in this dream was that he drank the breast milk from the Virgin Mary.
Okay.
And that cured him. And he pushed for the veneration of Mary at a time, again, when the church was very male dominant. And it was because of him that the church turned at least a little bit to Mary worship, which we didn't have up until then. But the Templar, because he was the patron of the Templars then became big venerators of the Virgin Mary. And so whenever they were going into battle, they went into the battle on behalf of the Virgin Mary, not on behalf of Jesus.
Right.
And so when we start seeing the Templars come back and they start building these massive Gothic cathedrals that they learned how to build when they were in the Middle East, like Notre Dame, Our Lady, they were always named after the Virgin Mary.
Right.
So the Templars were very much worshipers of the feminine because of this whole Virgin Mary thing. And that may play into why the Black Madonna was brought, as you suggested, to Europe by the Templars. Again, the Templars, even though they were monks and they were fighters, army, that you wouldn't think of them as feminists because in many ways they were anything but. But for whatever reason, they had this idea of the feminine and the importance of the feminine to a healthy society, and they were rejecting the strict patriarchy of the church at the time, and that may have been what eventually got them outlawed in 1307. That it may have been that the church at some point said, "All right, enough of all this sacred feminine stuff. We've had enough of it, and the Crusades are over. We don't need you guys anymore." But it may also be that the reason the Templars had this affiliation with the goddess is because they learned things when they were in the Middle East, when they were in Jerusalem, when they were digging under King Solomon's temple. They may have learned things about early Christianity that indicated that the feminine was important at the time of Jesus, which I think is what really was happening. I think Jesus viewed Mary Magdalene as his partner, as his consort, and that as part of the old Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage between men and women, that was what the balance was needed for a healthy society, and that Jesus preached that. And I think that was something the Templars learned when they were in Jerusalem. They came back to Europe with it, and the church said, no, we can't have that. Right. We need you guys to keep your mouth shut. And if you keep your mouth shut, we'll let you stick around. We'll let you have your land. We won't make you pay taxes. You can be our army. But then at some point, it got too dangerous to have them out there with that kind of knowledge that could undermine everything the church wanted. So the same reason they wiped out the Cathars in the early 1200s is the reason they wiped out the Templars in the early 1300s.
Well, didn't they wipe out a lot of debt also when they wiped out the Templars?
That's a good point too. We should bring this example to our friends in Rhode Island. Maybe instead of having a foreclosure auction, just say take out your banker, so you don't.
That's it,
if you wipe out your banker, you wipe out your debt too. Yeah. So,
because that's why you could go into the spiritual and the heretical and belief system, but there was definitely, what is it, follow the money kind of thing? Like all that money because
so you're right. The Templars had lent a lot of money to the King of France, Philip le Bel, and it was Philip le Bel, and along with the Pope Leo, wrong name, different Pope. Anyway, I forget his name, but the Pope and Philip le Bel together decided to outlaw the Templars, and the Pope did it for the reasons I just outlined. The King of France did it, as you just suggested, because he wanted to wipe out his debt.
Right. Yeah, that there was also a very practical, reason for it. Or like, oh yeah, we're doing this to your Holy Mother Church, whatever. But however, besides that, we get out from under a mountain of debt.
A huge amount of debt. Yeah.
Do you believe that or do you think that it's this story that was tied into Mary of Magdala or Mary Magdalene also had to do with the Merovingian bloodline, etc.? Do you think there's truth to that?
I do. So the Merovingian bloodline rumor is that when Mary Magdalene came to the Provence region, the coastal area of southern France, after the crucifixion, that she had Jesus' children, and those children continued the bloodline, and they became, I believe it was around the 5th century or 6th century, the Merovingian leaders, Mer meaning having the same root as Mary, but they became the Merovingian leaders of France for about 200 years. And that it's that bloodline that supposedly continued down. yeah, so that story seems to hold together, and again, that's related to all the many Mary Magdalene chapels in that
Yes.
area of France, the Black Madonnas, as you suggested, the Rennes-la-Château mystery. That's of all the places in Europe, that area of southern France is where you see the most amount of Mary Magdalene worship. And again, that's why my wife Kim and I are going to go there in early October. We're very curious to do some driving around and see that all for
Yes, yes,
ourselves.
because as they say France, but in particular, that area of France is the one that has the heaviest. Even though I believe there is a Black Madonna, there is it in Wittendorf, Germany, but the majority of them are in France, and they're very
Yes.
similar. That the way their height and the way they're posed, and the child on their knee, either with a blessing or holding the ball, like they're all very similar. Like everybody was on the same page when they
Hmm.
sculpted these or made these Black Madonnas. Uh, so and I'm sure that there's also and I don't know if you've heard about this. There's also one that they believe. Now this is one of those things like, where does the truth lie? And there's a I don't know if you've heard of it. There's a chateau in the Ardennes, in the forest of Ardennes in Belgium,
I've not
which
heard this. Go ahead. Yeah.
and which at what time it was built, like in around 1877, and it was originally built for the brother of King Leopold. They were Catholic. There was a chapel in there. Eventually, when they died, they got resold, etc., etc. There's a lot of dark rumors about what happens in there, but the story is that when the house was originally built, they, like I said, they built a chapel, a very nice chapel, and that there is a Black Madonna there. But the thing is this: there's only 3 photographs ever of the interior taken of this chateau, which, by the way, I found them. They date back to 1905, and there's no floor plan. And even though technically it's unoccupied, it has very heavy security on the grounds, and inside. Like, nobody knows anything about this place. So nobody
Hmm.
knows really if there's truth to that there is a Black Madonna there, or other rumors that are attached to that property. And I was wondering if you had heard of that.
No, but I want to write it down. Could you tell me the name of it again? Because it
The
sounds like a fun.
Chateau of Ardennes, Ardennes, and it's in Belgium.
Belgium. Okay.
And
That sounds like a fun little mystery to
well,
look
I was
into for.
surprised that they were saying it is true. There is no photographs of the interior, and no floor plans ever have been submitted for it or are known to exist. And the 3 photographs are from like 1905. That's it. Nobody knows what that goes on. It's been occupied. The family that bought it around 1910, the descendants still own it. But talk about ultra secretive. That's more than yeah. That goes beyond it. Like, they have super strict security, high tech, by the way.
Okay,
Not
I'll
only
check it
of
out.
the chateau, but on the grounds and so forth. But there's a lot of stuff that they say is going on there, or has been going on there. But that's one of the things. So yeah, and I'm sure, like you said, there's probably some Black Madonnas maybe in private collectors' hands somewhere along the line.
Oh,
Um,
I'm sure this. I would guess there's many of them. I would, especially because I don't think the church necessarily wants to keep them. Like, I think the church is probably happy to be rid of those
well,
things
yeah, right.
because
Either
just
and if they have
people
them, they
have
will
uncomfortable
probably keep
questions.
them in one of these vaults, underneath the Vatican or something like that. Like, we're the only ones
Yeah.
that know what we have. Let me ask you, besides Oak Island, because I'm going to say Oak Island, I want to say, is the most well-known place that people think that the Templars took their treasure. Is there any other
Yes.
place, especially in the Americas, that they could have
So,
gone to?
this is a fascinating uh, rumor, I guess we'll call it.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than a rumor because there's some evidence that there's copies of documents. We don't have the originals that indicate the Templars in the late 1100s
Okay.
made a crossing and ended up in the Catskill Mountains of New York, so up the
Really?
Hudson River, and
Okay.
that's something called the Cremona document. If any of your
Mm-hmm.
listeners are familiar with the Oak Island mystery, there's
Right.
a famous map from a woman named Zena Halpern provided a map
Okay.
that she's passed away, since passed away, but her map is mentioned a lot on the Oak Island show. But she did a lot of research on this Catskill Mountain mystery, which is what
Okay.
eventually led her to Oak Island. So she went to Catskills and it led her to Oak Island, which actually ended up on the show. But the rumor is that in the late 1100s, the Templars made their way across and that when they did so, they were both bringing some of their treasures across. And when I say treasures, probably some monetary treasure, but also probably documents and other things that they may have found when they were in digging under the Temple of Solomon. But also when they were there, they found a settlement of people who had come over from Israel earlier, way back, even before the time of Jesus, back in like the 3rd or 4th century BC, at a time when Judaism was taking a turn towards patriarchy, away from the goddess worship. Again, it all goes back to goddess worship, because during the time of King Solomon was perfectly willing to let people worship the goddess. He had foreign wives, they worshiped the goddess, he built temples for them. Goddess worship was fine. So that was, say, 900 BC. By the time we get to 500 or 400 BC, the more rigid members of the Jewish community said, all right, enough of that. We've got one God. It's the bearded guy. It's Yahweh. And so the theory is that some of the more liberal members or progressive members of Jewish society left. We know that to be a fact. We don't know where they went. And according to this whole story, some of them ended up in the Catskill Mountains of New York, and had a settlement and sort of married into the Native American tribes. And when the Templars came across, they somehow knew about this, and they met up with them. And one of the things that this group had, the group had with them some ancient documents and ancient scrolls and whatever. And so this whole mystery about the Templar treasure, it's a fascinating possibility that the Catskill Mountains was a repository for these ancient documents and ancient artifacts that the Templars were bringing back and forth in this, I think it was like 1169 or 1170. And interestingly, those dates match up really nicely with some of the artifacts that were found on Oak Island. For example, the coconut fibers that were used
I saw that show.
for the box drains for the booby trap flood tunnels on Oak Island. For people don't know, the reason no one's ever gotten the treasure is every time people dig down, there's a booby trap where the flood waters come in from the ocean and wipe out the hole and wipe out anybody in it. But the box drains that are used to bring the water in from the ocean into the underground flood tunnels have coconut fiber to filter out to make sure they'll get plugged up, basically. Those coconut fibers, obviously there's no coconuts in Nova Scotia. That's not native. So the coconut had to come from someplace. But the coconut dating on 3 different occasions from Woods Hole Oceanographic Society of the carbon dating of these coconut fibers comes out at like 1170, the exact date of this journey supposedly by the Templars. So one of the possibilities is the Templars brought the coconut with them, either for a food source or because they had the coconut fiber for packing other goods, and they used that to build the flood tunnel. So that's one of the interesting tie-ins between the Templars and Oak Island. But it also ties in nicely with the Catskill Mountain mystery, which is dated around the same time. I believe Scott Walter has a book that's going to be coming out soon. He's been vetting this mystery, and again, one of the problems is we don't have original documents. We only have copies. And when you only have copies, you can't carbon date them. You can't test the ink. It's all and honestly, some of the people involved in this have a bit of a sketchy history. But you can't just sort of throw it away because you're concerned that maybe some of these people are not 100% reliable. If you need to dig down and determine is the history valid or not. And
but
there has been
a chance that it might be.
It might be, yeah, and it's too important to not. And so I've been involved. This was maybe 12, 13 years ago. A group went up to Catskill Mountains, and we had some maps that were part of this whole thing, and we dug, and we found artifacts. And those artifacts still exist today, and they are incredibly interesting and fascinating and intriguing. I just don't know if they're authentic or not. I don't know if they were planted.
Is that people have lost their lives on Oak Island looking for this treasure. Some people don't.
Oh, many, yeah.
There's been deaths along the years that, for lack of a better word, I'm going to use a word. They become obsessed with finding it, and sometimes things have happened there. That's why I believe that's the name of the show, The Curse of Oak Island. because
Right.
of
I
that.
think nine people have died. 11 people have
Yeah.
died, and I think 11 people have died. And famous people have been looking. People like the actor John Wayne was up there. The
Yeah.
President Franklin Roosevelt was part of a team. A
Yeah.
huge number of Freemasons. One of the reasons why the Freemasons are supposedly descended from the Knights Templar, and if it's a Templar treasure, then the Masons might know where it is. And every time there's a group that goes up there, it seems like it's full of Freemasons. Like the Freemasons
Yes.
are even more obsessed with Oak Island than the general population, and so that adds a layer of intrigue to the mystery as well.
Let me ask you something, David. When the everybody knows that, what was it? The 13th, Friday the 13th, when the Templars get rounded up.
Right.
And I always ask myself, because you always think of them as being like they're on they've got spies, for lack of a better word. They've got the intel. And I'm thinking, how did they sneak up on these guys?
Yeah, they
To
didn't. So here's what happened. So on Friday the 13th of October, 1307, which is
Right.
where the famous Friday the 13th comes
Mm-hmm.
from, the Philip le Bel, the French king, with cooperation from the Pope, his troops stormed the Templar treasury in Paris,
Right.
and what they found was basically nothing. The
Okay.
Templars did have knowledge of this, like you said, they had spies. They had taken all of their treasure out of Paris. It looks like it went to a coastal town on the east coast. I'm sorry, the west coast of France called La Rochelle. And
Okay.
from La Rochelle, the treasure went someplace. And one of the good possibilities is because it's on the west coast of France as opposed to the northern coast of France. If you were going to bring your treasures to Scotland, which is one of the
Mm-hmm.
possibilities, you would then depart to Scotland from northern France. You wouldn't depart from western France. But if you're going across the Atlantic Ocean, then the La Rochelle location makes a lot more sense.
Okay.
One of the reasons supposedly the Templars were in the Catskill Mountains in the 1180s is they saw the writing on the wall. They saw what was starting to happen to the Cathars in
Right.
France. They saw that might be their fate later on, and they
Right.
knew they needed a safe haven to bring their treasures, to bring their
Mm-hmm.
secrets, and to bring themselves if eventually the Vatican turned on them. And so when the Vatican did turn on them 130 years later, they
Right.
had a place already set up. They had a safe
Mm-hmm.
haven. They had built relationships with the Native Americans, with the settlement already in the Catskills. And so when it came time, when they got word that the Philip le Bel was gonna make a move on them, they sent their treasures to La Rochelle, and from La Rochelle across the ocean to America, probably to the Catskills. They did know, and that's one of the possibilities as
Okay.
to what treasure ended up on Oak Island or eventually the Catskills.
Do you think there's a possibility? And I know that some people say that that wasn't possible till later on. Do you think that they could have sailed, let's say, from Marseille, or it was would eventually be Marseille, let's say, out into the Orient, out into Asia?
I've I've never heard that because if they were leaving from Marseille, they would have to have come out around the Straits of Gibraltar. There was no
Mm-hmm.
Suez Canal then, obviously. They would have had to have either cross overland across Egypt, Saudi Arabia, whatever, to get to the Indian Ocean somehow, or they
Right.
would have to come all the way circumnavigated the tip of Africa, which they could have done. I'm not saying they couldn't have done
Mm-hmm.
that, but that seems like an awfully long way to go when you could just cross the Atlantic. Not
Across
not
the
that the
Atlantic.
Atlantic is a short crossing, but it's
Right.
probably 1/5 or 1/8 of the length of the journey to come all the way
Okay.
around Africa to get to Asia. I've never heard the Templars in Asia theory.
Okay.
Is that
All right.
something you've heard before?
Yeah, on occasion, that not that that wouldn't be the only place. It's like let's hedge our bets and let's go off in different directions. And as a matter of fact, I was going to ask you, do you think at any point, if we look at, let's say that they did come to America, do you think at some point they would have come back with whatever they took with them to Europe?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well,
Would they have
let's
come?
say they're fleeing. They've taken whatever, whether it was documents, money, relics, whatever. They flee.
Probably
They
everything.
go to
All
America. Yeah, whatever
all of the above. Yeah.
they come to America. All right, whether it's Oak Island or the Catskills or somewhere. Right, few hundred years go by, 200-300 years, and I'm sure by now, that they would have brought all that they took with them and taken it back to Europe, or do you think that they just hid it away here, let's say in America?
Well, that's interesting. So we know that they were outlawed in 1307. So, and obviously, even though they were outlawed, you can outlaw the mafia. It doesn't mean they go away. It just means they go underground. And in the Templars' case, they reconstituted themselves as different organizations. Sure. The Knights of Christ in Portugal, the Teutonic Knights in Germany, the Freemasons, probably in Scotland. And so now it's these successful organizations. Would they have come back and retrieved their things, or would they have left them in America? That's an interesting question. One of the theories I've heard is that the treasure that was at Oak Island was left there, and in the 1770s, a group of Freemasons from Philadelphia went up to Oak Island and retrieved the treasure and brought it back and liquidated it and used it to fund the American Revolution.
Oh wow! I had never heard that. Holy smokes!
Yeah, that's one of that, and that's actually in those documents I mentioned that talk about the Catskill, the Catskills journey. The logs, the travel logs, go all the way up through the 1800s, and in some of those travel logs, it talks very specifically about certain members of a certain family going up and doing this and meeting with the Freemasons up in Nova Scotia. And we've actually cross-checked the names against the log books of a Masonic lodge in Nova Scotia from the 1700s, and the names actually match up. They match up and everything, so it's crazy. But that's one of the stories, is that this family, that it's the Weems family, I believe, related to the Sinclair family, that they went up there and did this and retrieved the treasure and brought it back. And again, I can't swear to the authenticity of it, but it's a fabulous story because it just sort of, your reaction was a great one, Marlene. You're like, wow, it's a cool story because it just sort of ties everything together. If we believe that the Freemasons were a huge part of forming our government and the founding fathers, and if that's true, which we think it is, then it makes sense that they would retrieve the Templar treasure and use it to build this new Jerusalem, this country.
What people don't realize is that pre the actual revolution being declared, or when they knew where it was going, even the landowners or the people there, or the colony, some of them, they didn't want to live under the yoke of England, but they weren't willing to give money over. Like, hey, you need to feed your armies, you need to clothe your armies, you need to, and they weren't. That's a great idea, but they weren't giving money. So, well,
they didn't want to pay tax to England. They don't want to pay tax to the Continental Congress either. Like, they didn't want to pay taxes, period.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, no one wants to pay taxes.
And that's great that we're gonna not be under the thumb of England. But you need money for the soldiers? Oh no, wait a minute. People don't realize that there was a need. Yeah. You have to take care of an army. I mean, somehow or other.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a fun possibility. Is that the treasures, at least the monetary treasures, were liquidated in the 1770s to fund the American Revolution, and it's just one of those stories that make you, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I don't know how, I can't swear to it, but that's one of the possibilities. The other possibility I've heard is that the treasures were brought to Oak Island or the Catskills. And then as settlement occurred and more the East Coast became populated and settled, that the treasures would move further west, eventually ending up in Montana with some of the Native American tribes out there. And so that's also one of the possibilities I've heard, is that there's caves out in Montana that the treasure was placed in. And again, has it been retrieved? There are stories of a group during the Civil War led by a prominent Freemason named Albert Pike. I don't know if you know that name. Of course. Okay, it was Albert Pike. It was his statue that was torn down during the Black Lives Matter rallies a number of years ago, and I think it's been put back up again. But he was a Confederate general, but also the leading Freemason. He wrote something called Morals and Dogma. He also was an attorney who had very close relations with some of the Western tribes. But
Okay.
because he was the head of Freemasonry and also very, very knowledgeable about all things Masonic and all things Templar, there's a possibility that he knew that the treasure, if anybody knew where the treasure was at that time, it would have been him. Let's put it that way. If that's the case, and he did have very close relations with the Western tribes, one of the possibilities is that he retrieved that treasure from Montana, say, because of his friendship with the tribes. As a lawyer, he represented the tribes in many cases against the federal government, and
Right.
that he took the treasure and liquidated it and used it to fund the Confederacy during the Civil War. So that's another possibility as to what happened to the treasure.
Oh, because people don't realize those caves up in Montana, Wyoming, they're very cool and dry. So if you put things in there, they keep very well because
Yeah,
of the low temperature and they're very dry. So maybe they were
yeah, and
chosen
don't
also for that reason. Who knows?
yeah, and don't forget those tribes are very powerful up there. So the Blackfoot tribe, as an
Oh yeah.
example, you know, if the Blackfoot wanted to hide something, they could hide something. There weren't that many settlers out there, and the Blackfoot were very powerful and
Let's face it,
talented
you would take
warriors.
your life in your hands if you're going to go out there.
Right. You're not getting that without an army. You're not getting that treasure,
Mm-mm,
and even with
mm-mm.
an army, you might not. But again, Pike had good relations with them, and it's possible that they were keeping it for the Templars. And if Pike could convince them that he was the successor to the Templars, they might have given it up. So that's another. That's one of the other
Nice.
rumors I've heard
Isn't
about the
he?
Templar
Wasn't
treasure.
Albert Pike originally? I think from Charleston in South
He,
Carolina or something
you
like
know, he
that.
was from. So I live in Newburyport, Massachusetts right now. He's
Okay.
from Newburyport. He's
Oh,
from
really? Is
Newburyport.
he?
About,
Okay.
and so the book you asked me, my last book was something called Templar Lives. The one before that
Uh
is
huh.
something called the Essex Junta, Essex County, which is where I live and where Pike lived. And the book
Okay.
basically is about Albert Pike.
Okay.
His fascinating connection between Freemasonry and the things we just talked about, the Templar treasures, and Albert Pike seems like every conspiracy theory you can imagine, whether it's Skull and Bones Society at Yale
Yes.
University,
Right.
the Knights of the Golden Circle from the Civil War. He was a part of that. Obviously, he was a part of Freemasonry. Albert Pike seems like every single conspiracy road leads
To
leads
Albert.
back to Albert Pike. Yeah, morals and dogma from Freemasonry. And so I had a lot of fun again, not knowing that this guy grew up in the town I live in, literally a mile from where I'm sitting right now. And so that was another fascinating story about how these powerful shipping families in colonial America, especially
Mm-hmm.
in the New England shipping towns like Salem and Marblehead and Ipswich and Newburyport,
Right.
they were trying to get the New England states to secede from the Union. This is around the time of the War of 1812.
Right.
Much as later on the southern states did secede, but the northern states wanted to secede. Some people in the northern states wanted to secede
Right.
in around the time of 1812, and then later, I think these northern powerful shipping families, I think they were working with the southern families to push the South to secede because they wanted to fracture the Union. And it never came out. It's a part of history we don't know about. But that's what my book looked into, and it's a
Wow.
fascinating possibility. And that Pike from the North moved to the South, like you said, Charleston, South Carolina, and
Mm-hmm.
he was working with his old allies up here in the North, and together they were working to agitate for a civil war. It wasn't just the South. They had allies
Right.
in the North and these shipping families, and it was Pike working with his old cohorts from Newburyport,
Right.
and
Yeah. He had
together they were
the connection there. That's the thing.
yeah.
It's who you
And so that
know.
yeah, that book is some of my most, in my mind, most fascinating research. It's called the Essex Junta, Junta.
Mm-hmm.
That's an actual organization. If you can read Wikipedia, it's right there. But it's Albert Pike working from the South with his old cohorts in the North, trying to splinter the Union.
Let
It's
me
a
ask you, do
fascinating
you
story.
think, especially since we were talking here about the American Revolution, and of course, a lot of founding fathers that were Masons, etc. You know, what do you think? What happened? How's this? Where did the French Revolution go wrong? Besides the guillotine thing, but you know, where do you think that it just, one thing, the United States, they established, they had the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, etc., etc., and then the next thing the French Revolution, they, killed a bunch of, the aristocrats. Some of the leaders of that movement ended up getting their heads cut off to end up with Napoleon, and then, and I always wondered, were the Masons or anything having to go on in France like that? Have you come across any research having to do with that?
Yeah, so the Masons were a big part of that. No doubt about the whole French Revolution thing. I think the problem was, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert in this, so this take this with a grain of salt. It looked to me like the Masons are trying to play both sides against the middle. Okay. And on the one hand, they were part of the agitation trying to get rid of the monarchy.
Right.
But then when things went too far, they were also part of the ruling elite. They didn't want to go too far with all this stuff, so they sort of got caught in the careful what you wish for,
Right, yeah.
And I think in the end, once you unleash a mob, it's hard to control it.
Oh, sure.
And I think they learned that lesson. So, that's sort of my short answer. I can't go much deeper on it because I don't know a ton of the French Revolution history, but I did read about that recently because of the Masonic involvement with it. But it was basically one of those things where they were trying to play both sides against the middle.
Well, as a matter of fact, one of the, they had the different leaders, and one of, everybody thinks, there were several people in the French Revolution that came from aristocratic families, which is kind of like what? And I believe one of them, I can't remember. He was you could tell this guy was like on the psychopathic side. One of the places he went to desecrate was where they had the tomb of Mary of Magdala, and they hid her body, they hid her remains, so that he wouldn't find them and desecrate them. And then
that's interesting. What? Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yes.
I know that. Later on, when Napoleon eventually took power in the 1803, 1804, and he marched to, he eventually took over Italy and controlled the Vatican. He took the entire Vatican library and he shipped it back to Paris, and then he sent copies of everything back to the Vatican, but obviously not everything made it back. But
really, I did not know.
Yeah, so one of the books I keep waiting to write, and I haven't done it yet, is what happened to all those documents that went from the Vatican. Actually, no, he didn't make. He kept copies and sent the originals back, or something. Okay. I forget. But obviously, not everything went back. But there's rumors that there's a bunch of original Vatican documents going way back in time that are still someplace in Paris, because when Napoleon took it all back, and I forget if he gave back copies or gave back originals, I forget what he did, but I know at one point he took everything to Paris. And
wow,
everyone's always like, we got to get into the Vatican archives to see what's going on. It may be that the answer is in Paris, but I haven't gotten any deeper than that. So
that's very.
If you hear anything, let me know. Marlene, if you hear anything, let me know, please.
It makes you think. You always think of the Vatican holding real tight to all their documentation and what God knows what they have. That people don't even know might exist as far as antiquities or writings or whatever. But I did not know that Napoleon had done that. It's like, knowledge is power. Let me tell you, it's.
Well, I think he just wanted it because of his ego. He wanted to.
Yeah.
He just wanted all the documents, but you're right. Power too, no doubt about power.
Back, it's especially if you're thinking how's this? Not maybe not power so much as what we traditionally think of power, but spiritual power, because you have the knowledge of maybe esoteric things. Who knows? But that's an interesting segue to another quick thing that Hitler, you probably know, during the war, was obsessed with trying to find the Holy Grail and called the Arma Christi, the thorns on Jesus' head. What are those things called? Yes, right. I know what you're talking about. Yes.
The headpiece of thorns. And the lance the spear.
The spear of destiny.
Thank you. But Hitler was obsessed, and he sent teams out. He sent teams to Roslin Chapel in Scotland. He sent teams and a matter of fact, to southern France looking for this stuff. Went to Montsegur, one of the hilltop refuge of the Cathars during the Albigensian Crusade. But Hitler was obsessed. He believed that these things had magical powers,
Yes.
and he believed he could A, he could weaponize them and win the war, and B, he could become immortal. So he was obsessed with, even before the war and during the war, of finding all of these religious artifacts that he thought he could use to gain power.
Sure. And you know, everybody says, okay, you know, he had all these scientists working on all these scientific endeavors, right? But there was
The crown
definitely
of the crown of thorns.
the crown of
Pardon me, the
thorns.
crown of
They
thorns.
also
Yes,
believed
yes,
very much so in, like you said, the esoteric metaphysical aspects. Like they really believed it. It wasn't for the sake of, I'm going to have this item for because I wanted it in a museum. It was because they actually thought they had power. The
yes,
different,
exactly.
yes, they really
Yep.
truly believed, and they like you said, they went to a lot of places on a hunch. You know, like same thing. Like when was the last time we knew about this? That this existed? Where was it at? So yeah, that's why I'm saying that sometimes the power is not necessarily power as in tangible power, like I have power over you. It's spiritual, or you know, if they perceive it that way. How's that? Um, what do you
Yeah.
and I know that the Templars, like you said, they kind of evolved. Um, and do they still exist by a different name?
Right. So there's two things. So there are groups today that claim to be the modern day successors of the Templars. They're
Right,
based in France and they have branches around. There's like two or three different groups that way.
right,
One of which, in particular, is very much religious in the sense loyal to the church.
right,
Others, like the original Templars were, other groups are more just sort of esoteric, looking to continue the Templar belief in world peace and
right.
in the study of esoteric matters. And then also within Freemasonry, there's two things going on there. One is that some people believe that when the Templars were outlawed, they reconstituted themselves as the Freemasons, which is,
Okay,
I happen to believe that. Secondly, even if they did not, there are groups within Freemasonry that call themselves the Knights Templar, where you can, within Freemasonry, there are different paths you can take, and one of the paths is you become a Knight Templar. And you can
okay,
study the Knights Templars and rituals, and you get to dress up as a Templar and carry a sword, and that's based on the Templars, obviously. So
right.
there's lots of different manifestations in modern days of Templar-like or Templar-inspired organizations, all of which claim some connection to the historical Templars. There's also a possibility that a group called the Rosicrucians,
Yes,
that when the Templars were outlawed, they reconstitute themselves as the Rosicrucians, and the Rosicrucians were sort of famous for studying, looking for the sort of the elixir of life, the fountain of youth. That's one of the things that they're famous for, more on the scientific side of things. So there are lots of different offshoots, groups that in the late 1800s, there were a huge number of these different groups that sprung up,
yes,
all claiming to have their roots back in the Knights Templar. There was a famous guy named Aleister Crowley,
yes.
who was considered the most evil man on
Yeah.
Earth. He had an organization based on sex magic, and
Oh yeah.
that tied back to the Templar ritual and stuff. So there's been so many different groups that have sprung up out of the Templars. But there's three or four today that call themselves Knights Templar,
Right, right. And
and
that's the
most of them are,
thing.
you know, some take women. You could join, Marlene, if you wanted. I could join if I wanted to. You don't have to be, even if you're not a Christian. Some of them will take, some require you have to be Christian, some require you have to be male, but not all of them. So
I
you
had a
could join.
friend of mine who I used to work with, and her dad was a Rosicrucian, and
Uh
she
huh.
told me that when she was like 15 years old, they would have these ceremonies that they brought her in with some other girls because they were all virgins to play something, the part of Columba. There was some type of ceremony. There was nothing
Wow.
perverted or anything. Okay, having to do with that, and her and some other girls, that daughters of some of the members that were brought in because they were doing some ceremony representative of Columba. She told me this a while back, and I
Wow.
remember she even told me that one time her dad, because you know the Rosicrucians are very big into timing. The timing on things is really important, and
I didn't know that. Okay.
the her dad had to go in for some type of surgery, and he made the doctor do perform the surgery at like 5 minutes after this time. He says,
Huh.
I'm not going to have the surgery until you start it like at 5 after whatever, 7 o'clock, whatever. Like he was
Wow.
like, it was like he was full blown. Yes, Rosicrucians, for them, timing is very, very important, especially like something, let's say, as important like a surgery or some undertaking or things. I don't know what he was basing the timing on per se, but I remember her telling me, she goes, no, my dad, when he needed that surgery, he was like, what? He was very obstinate about with the doctor and everything. That
I've never heard that about it. Maybe it's like
yes,
biorhythms or something, even, but
and
yeah, I
I
never heard
don't
that.
know if honestly, I don't know if we're talking here astrologically. I don't know. I don't know what he was looking at as far as the timing, like why at that time versus 10 minutes before.
Hmm.
On a yeah, so I know that the Rosicrucians, that they have their own thing going on as far as the esoteric belief systems, and and then the reason why I asked you is like sometimes you hear like these groups evolve, and like you said, there's that they call themselves the Templar especially because so they're well known, but then the true real Templars are underground. Like nobody knows that the real original Knights Templar are like only the members know who the members are. How's that? Kind
That
of
would
thing.
make it so. So again, we go back to 1307. We know that they were quote unquote outlawed, but we also know they didn't disappear because you just can't,
Right.
just can't wave your magic wand and
Right.
so these were powerful people, and had a lot of wealth, and they had secrets,
Right.
and they had passion, and you have to assume that got passed down generation after generation,
Mm-hmm.
and manifested itself in some other successor organization. But like you said, there's also a possibility that we know of 6 or 7 of them, and none of them are the real successors. That the real successors are underground, and nobody knows about them because
Right.
they're a secret society. And because they're a secret society, they're a secret.
Right. Exactly. So much so that, and you always think, okay, let's say obviously before that, they could recruit openly or whatever their litmus test was for to join. But once they went
Yes.
underground, how did they recruit new knights to join the order, knowing this is the kind of person that we need, and but more importantly, this person will keep their mouth shut. I think that's very interesting. Because the other day I was thinking, I was talking about this, that sometimes there's such a thing as oral tradition, or even if something's written, sometime the person that knows about it or supposed to pass the secret on dies unexpectedly. And as a
Right.
matter of fact, this came around about 3 years, 4 years ago. In Spain, they were doing a dig for, they have very old Roman villas that they sometimes find in Spain when the Romans were in there in Hispania, what they call Hispania, the Iberian
Yes.
Peninsula. So they come across and they're doing this big dig on a villa, and under a portico of what they think would have been like the barn, they find like 16 ampules full of gold coins, all minted. Back then what they would do is they would stamp the whoever the emperor was, they would
Well, the
stamp
emperor
his
was right.
head
Yeah.
on the coin. There was coins there from 4 emperors, and they were explaining, how they found, they had never been found, and I was thinking, you know what? Somebody put this money away, and I don't think they forgot about it. I think they died. That people sometimes that have information just die. Something falls on their head, they have an aneurysm or pestilence or
Yeah.
something, and then nobody knows that, hey, there's 16
Well, that
ampules of money under the lintel of the barn underground.
so one of the conversations I have often is people say to me, because one of my big theories is the Templars were in America before Columbus. Okay,
Right.
we just talked about the Oak Island and Catskills. They came over in the 1180s and the 13th, whatever. So all these groups, and I feel very strongly about that. And people say, well, how come we don't know about it? And I say, well, first of all, it's a secret society. They kept their
Uh-huh.
secrets. They don't have anything in writing. As they say, well, what about the Native Americans? And I say, well, the Native Americans actually have an oral tradition, and I've
Yes.
talked to Native American tribal chiefs, and they say, yeah, our oral tradition is that the Templars were here, and blah blah blah. They confirm it, but only a couple different tribes have said that to me. Not every tribe, and so people say, what about the other tribes? And this goes back to your point, Marlene, that the Native Americans were basically wiped out. So if they had an
Yes.
oral tradition, which they did,
Right.
and it did not get passed down, it didn't get passed down because 90% of the population was wiped out. You lose knowledge when you lose 90% of your people. If there's a pestilence or a genocide, those secrets just get lost. And so, we don't know.
You think, okay, you know what? The ones that really know about it are maybe like the 3 or 4 or 5, the chief and maybe the son. People, the important people.
Right.
Those are the ones that really know where it's at. And then something happens. Like, in other words, it's not well known. And of course, it didn't have writing. So I imagine from the Templar point of view, it's like, great, these people can't write this down and leave behind. So, and then the 3, 4, 5 people in the tribe, like you said, all of a sudden something happens. They get wiped out, and there goes the secret. Is a real secret, for real. Like, no, not anybody knows about it. And then, like you said, then you'll get it's like
the Spanish coins.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the coin. So, yeah. All right. So I think we covered it. That's in a nutshell right there.
Yeah. So I think that, you always wonder, like, how's this? I look at this, especially when I'm looking at this program, of Oak Island. I'm thinking, God, they're so precautious. They've took so much effort to hide it or disguise it or whatever. And I think to myself, God, that's one of the things that you hear. Like, do you leave something that important, whatever the thing is or things? Would you leave it there or would you move it? That's always been my thing, because to me, and that's just the way my mind thinks, after a while, I would move it. That's
again, that's part of the theory, is that they eventually moved it west to eventually Montana, because as population began to grow, like you said, there was more and more of a chance of it being discovered. On the other hand, Oak Island itself was never really that popular a place. Like, there wasn't much going on there for a long, long time. It was not, there was no reason for people to live there because they lived on the mainland, and so it wasn't a bad hiding place. So it was, things were buried, and
right.
It wasn't a terrible place. It wasn't like it wasn't like downtown Boston or something. It was a secluded place even during colonial times. But maybe. So yeah, well, hopefully we'll get some answers this year on Oak Island. Hopefully Scott Walter's book is going to come out talking more about the Catskill stuff, which I'm fascinated by. Hopefully we can get an answer on that. And then next time we talk, we won't have to wonder. We can talk about things in solid and look at this treasure we found.
Look what this turned out to be.
Yeah, we could talk about. We could pat each other on the back and say how right we were.
Or it was like, oh no, they didn't find anything after. Let me ask you: are you working on a book right now? Because you're telling me you're putting out 2 per year.
Yes, I am. I think when we start talking about the Black Madonna, that's one of the things I'm going to research now. But this book in particular, is going to focus again on a lot of the things we talked about tonight. This idea that Mary Magdalene was very important to the Jesus, to the religion that Jesus was trying to create. Right. And it didn't end up happening that way. But the idea of the sacred feminine, the more I research the Templars, the more I research the early years of Christianity, the more I see that the sacred feminine was supposed to be an important part of it.
Right.
And I think that Mary Magdalene's key to that. And I think the history of southern France and what happened to the Cathars, one of the reasons why the Cathars were wiped out was because the church wanted to suppress that knowledge. And it's hard to suppress knowledge. It bubbles back up again, which is what I think we're seeing right now. So I'm writing about that. But again, it always ties in back to the Templars. In this particular case, the focus is on Mary Magdalene.
Right. And I believe there was, like you said, sometimes they think that there's an amalgamation. I think Mary of Egypt was another one that they threw into the thing as far as who was actually ended up in France. And also, from what I understand, this version of that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute was not the original story on her. Yeah, that was, and even the church has disavowed that and said that we were wrong to say that. Even the church. Yeah, but that went on for hundreds of years, where she was a repentant prostitute.
I was with a buddy of mine the other day who's an observant Catholic, and I said, "Hey, was Mary Magdalene a prostitute?" He says, "Yeah." I'm like, even today, people still believe that.
And there wasn't. That's not her original story. So when do you not have any idea when you're going to be coming out with that book, or is that still up in the air?
That should be November. So the name of my series is called the Templars in America series, and there's 20 books in that now. The first book something called Cabal of the Westford Knights. There's this great legend in Western Massachusetts of this carving of a knight, a medieval knight, the Templars carved on the
Yes,
rock ledge when they
yes,
came
yes.
over here in 1398. Yeah, we talked about that last time I was on. And so
Yes.
that's sort of an overview of all this the Newport Tower and all the artifacts that indicate that the Templars were in America before Columbus. And that's sort of an overview book. And then the next 19 go off into some of those tangents, a lot of which we talked about today. The Oak Island tangent, the Catskill Mountain tangent, uh, the Hitler obsession with the Holy Grail tangent,
Mm-hmm.
all different books, but all again related, generally speaking, to the Templars and their treasure. And so this one, which is going to be the 21st book in the series, it should be out in November. Like I said, I'm
Okay.
going to France in October. I'm almost done writing it now. I do need to go there and just get some good pictures, get a little more research done. But I'm
Okay.
close to being able to button this thing down. And my wife, who reads these as I go along, said to me the other day that this one is the best one she's read in a long time. So I'm like,
Oh
all right, well, I'm
wow.
hopeful that it's going to come out good. So, of course, she has to say that. I mean, she lives with me, but what's she going to say? But she seems sincere about it. So I was pretty excited about that because she can be a tough critic, but she thinks it's some fun research and some really
Hey,
relevant research. So
let me tell you, you
yeah,
know what
so I'm
they
excited
say:
about it.
happy husband, happy life.
I've heard it the other way, but
I know,
happy.
I know. I'm just saying it works both ways. All right. So of
I'm sure
course
it
she's
does.
gonna say. So for you, my podcast listeners, Dave, what is your website?
It's davidbrodybooks.com, Brody, davidbrodybooks.com. And again, the name of the series is the Templars in America series. It's sort of fictional, I call it faction, fact-based fiction, similar in genre to the Da Vinci Code or the National
Yes,
Treasure, modern day stuff, but triggered by all this really fun history we talked about
this
tonight.
is great. Thank you so much, Dave. It has been absolutely wonderful to speak to you again.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Isn't that great? So much. You know what? There's history, then there's history. And let's face it, yeah, there's the history that everybody gets in you know, the how's this the vanilla? Well, not the vanilla, but yeah, the history that everybody knows about. And then there's history, the history of stuff like this. That when you hear it, you're like, really? You're kidding? I didn't know that. And yeah, I think that's very, which, by the way, which is now is being recognized that the Americas were being visited way before Christopher Columbus, that kind of deal. Um, and we talked about it. I think the last time that Dave was with me, where they thought that even BC, the Phoenicians were here mining for tin and for copper and everything. And people don't realize that, yes, of course, when Columbus came, you know, the, what he was in search of course, was the Orient, to to go to the Orient and find, because there was a route between Europe and the Orient, which was the Spice Road, and I believe the Ottoman had power over it, and they were charging a hefty fee. So the impetus was, we're going to find a way to get to the Orient by boat, and the Ottoman, we don't have to pay them to go and get the spices, which was money. As a matter of fact, when um, the stories of Marco Polo, were, his adventures in the Orient were on a trip with I believe it was his father and his uncle, and a merchant would be gone 2 and 3 years on that trip between coming back and forth overland. And of course, the idea with that exploration was to find another route, and they ran into the Americas. But anyway, but how's this? But when they discovered and they came back and they did everything, I think that for example, the Phoenicians, which there's a theory that they came to the Americas and they were even negotiating with the natives who were in that area to mine for them, and then they would buy it from them. See, they wanted to keep that source a secret. So there was no desire to come and colonize or do anything. All they wanted to do was, we'll show up once a year, probably when it was spring or summer, pick up our order of tin, copper, whatever it is that they got being mined for them, and then go back. All right. But the route, you kept it a secret. So there was no effort beyond that trip to come back and set up shop. No, no, no. They stayed where they were at. I believe, I think the Phoenicians are modern, well, it's modern day Lebanon today. I believe so. I'm not sure. Of course, that changed by the time Christopher Columbus, came over, and everything else that followed from the different countries. Because that's another thing. The competition by all these different European countries was to hold land and power. Because they had been on and off. One minute they were allies, and then another minute they were at war. So, and there you go with that. So, yeah, it's very interesting, though, what goes on behind the scenes. Like he's talking about here, did they transport Albert Pike, which has a kind of a reputation as being tied to Luciferianism and all that. Did they move it? Did they move that treasure or whatever it was? What might be a treasure to them, we don't know what it was. Relics, manuscripts, gold, jewelry. Did they move it? I that's the way I see it. If we stash something and you want to keep something a secret, and you're thinking eventually over time somebody might say something or figure it out or something, the idea would be to eventually move it to a new place, and then maybe the same thing eventually that one place where it's at, then you got to move it from there. Whether you want to say every 50 years, every 20 years, every 100 years or something, that's how you basically kept whatever it is you were hiding secret. That he talked about, that they took that and they used it to fund the Revolutionary War. I never heard that, but that's fascinating, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Because what people don't realize is that when they were going back and forth with Britain about taxation and all that, yes, of course they were what they consider themselves. Everybody considered themselves British subjects. They didn't want to break with Britain, but then there were others that did, because especially if you were a landowner, you had something, and hey, I don't want to get taxed anymore. Oh, but you need money. Yeah, we have to feed the soldiers and clothe them and buy armaments and bullets. They didn't want to cough up the money. They were like, oh yeah, let's overthrow the British hold over us. But you need what? So they had a hard time. So that idea of them funding themselves from that source, not far-fetched at all. So, there's so many, I guess, short of, at this point, some discovery of some manuscripts, some letter, somebody writing a diary. We picked up the treasure and we moved it to wherever. It's very interesting that for all the history that's written, how much of it, the actual history, remains unwritten. Or like he was saying, only the people that were involved at that time knew about it, and they weren't interested in having it known as far as history. In other words, my legacy, if you were the kind of person that was interested in the legacy, you never wanted you didn't want your kids to know about it. You never wanted the future. You don't want no history to tie you to something that was done for whatever, the greater good, or even your own personal gain. Bottom line, that sometimes history unfolds, and let's face it, nobody is ever going to know about it again unless somebody buys a desk. Here, I'm just making things up. Buys a desk, finds a secret drawer, finds a stash of manuscripts that are proven to be accurate, where this one person either is the participant that actually did it, or there's somebody close by. There's a book, and I thought this was a really neat book. There's an author. He was real big, like in the 1940s, 1950s, I want to say. And I believe his last name was it Chastain? God, Marlene. Anyway, he wrote a lot of adventure books or adventure novels around that time period, right? Thomas Chastain. There we go. I was giving him a new name. Thomas Chastain. All right. As a matter of fact, yes, he first published it in 1957. When you read the book, it's like kind of like a little bit of time travel kind of, but it takes you back to the 13th century, the plot of it, and basically it follows was it time travel or reincarnation, one of the two, I can't remember, and basically it's the knight, and he has I can't remember if it was his squire or another knight, but it was like a servant that follow him, and they have all these adventures, and this is around the time of like the Plantagenets, Eleanor of Aquitaine, all that, 12th and 13th century, the England, blah blah blah, the Magna Carta, all that. Anyway, the title refers to that when you seated people at these long tables that you see in these movies, where the salt was placed, if you were below the salt, means that you were like a servant or lesser in the pecking order, and the people that were nobles or had some title or some type of importance, they were above the salt. Bottom line, at the end, you're thinking, when he comes back, like I said, I can't remember if it was a reincarnation or time travel thing, you're thinking that the one that's seeing all of this is the main protagonist, the knight. Turns out that the one who saw everything and said the story was the guy that followed him around. I want to say it was like his servant. I can't remember if he was a junior knight or just a squire. And that's why the title is Below the Salt. Everybody thinks that because I believe it was the senators having a regression. So all this time during the book, you're thinking he is the main knight. And it turns out, no, he was the guy that was below the salt. My point being that sometimes history, or the truth of history, is sometimes witnessed by the unknown person. And you're thinking, okay, some of these events, short of somebody like a below the salt person writing, which by the way, depends where it is, not many people were literate, talking about what they've seen or what they heard. Now remember, in a time period where servants, especially if you were somebody with some type of a title or station in life, you got used to having servants coming in and out, all right? And you'd be surprised what some of these people overheard or saw, because they kind of forgot that these people were there and had a pair of ears. And a lot of them wouldn't say anything, especially if they wanted to keep their job, or, I'm not going to get in trouble over this. But they witnessed and saw a lot of things that that you think, I wonder if any of them ever, the real, what happened, the skinny on that event, that maybe history portrays it totally different. Can you imagine? That would be great. As far as the true history, remember, like I said, especially back in, we're talking here medieval times or anything where, the history is composed of these major figures that the Duke of this and that, or people in the church, people that had recognizable names, but that history was experienced by multitudes of unknowns. All right, that we might never know their names. So again, it's like, what is it? That would be an interesting thing, that if anything like that we ever came across some type of manuscript, and I guess I'm a proponent of putting the recognized history on its head. Something that throws, like what he's talking about, this gentleman, he's going to put out the book about these artifacts that supposedly have to do with the Masons, listen to me, with the Templars that are in the Catskills. I'd never heard of that. So it's going to be very interesting. Again, I hope you liked this interview with David Brody. I'm going to have a link to his website on the credits of the show. And by all means, check it out. Please don't forget to subscribe to my Substack newsletter. Go to mppellicer.com. You can also go to miamichronicles.com. There's links again for not only the newsletter, but links to all the articles I write, also the video version and the podcast version of any of the episodes that I have, regardless of not only stories of the supernatural, but supernatural story time, Nightshade Diary, Eerie News, you name it. That's going to be the place you're going to find it all at. And I'm already working on next year, the next season 19 of Stories of the Supernatural, which usually covers the time period from January to June of 2026. I'm already got guests coming in for that. So please come back. But thank you for being here today. And I'll be seeing you soon. Till next time. Take care.